Welcome aboard, Giants fans, to episode 69 of Talk It's Cheap, our New York Giants podcast right here on NJ.com. I'm Joe Giglio, joined by James Cratch and Dan Duggan. They are still somewhere in the Green Bay area before they come home. We're doing this podcast on a Monday morning. After a Sunday Night Football loss, the Giants lose their third game in a row, 23-16 to the Packers. It was ugly. The last 3 weeks have been ugly, and now the Giants sit in last place in the NFC East. James, as you sit here on this Monday morning, I mean, we talked in the beginning of the season of when Ben McAdoo would face adversity, the schedule, and all these different things that would come into this. But here we are after a 2-0 start, now 3 in a row on the wrong end of it.
Yeah, it's going downhill pretty quick. I think in hindsight, maybe we should have seen this coming. You look back at those first 2 wins, everyone was feeling great at a 2-0 start, but they were kind of wins that had some warts, and especially the Saints game where they didn't score an offensive touchdown. But yeah, I mean, it's all kind of come unraveled since the Redskins game. Obviously the Packers and the Vikings are 2 really good teams, but the Giants really have not been good at all, especially on offense the last 2 weeks. I think it's a major concern, and this team's at a fork in the road moment, and they could go really bad. So we'll see what happens now.
Yeah, they are. And Dan, when you look at what's going on here, specifically the offense, I mean, this is, I think, to a lot of people, surprising. I mean, the Giants right now, of teams that have played 5 games like they have, only the Rams, Texans, Browns, and Dolphins have scored less points. I mean, this is not what people expected. And even last night, and we're doing this on a Monday morning, when they scored late and Beckham got a touchdown, and that only put them at 16 points. They're just not moving the ball.
Yeah, I mean, you said it earlier, it's surprising. It's shocking, really, to me. I mean, you look at what this offense put up the last 2 seasons, albeit in losing seasons, but you bring pretty much everyone back, yet add weapons like a Sterling Shepard and a Victor Cruz. It's really hard to understand how things are going in the wrong direction. I mean, I guess we probably should have had our antenna up a little more for that Saints game, because the Saints defense always stinks. And for them to hold without a touchdown, pretty alarming, especially as it's been confirmed the Saints defense does in fact stink. I mean, that the problem is, the Vikings obviously great defense. You can chuck that one out. They haven't even been playing great defenses, so you can't say, the Packers defense was so good, it was so tough to go up there and score. I mean, that was the 29th ranked pass defense in the NFL, missing their top 2 cornerbacks. I mean, if ever a team was ripe for the picking, especially with a pass-happy offense, you really thought last night they're going to break out, as Ben McAdoo and everybody else said during the week. So to go up there and have that type of offensive performance is really alarming. I think with Eli Manning, I know a lot of the fans feel like he's getting a pass, and I think they're right at this point, because he hasn't been good at all this season. There's no other way to put it. I mean, Odell Beckham has taken the attention. Obviously, the McAdoo's probably more under fire than Eli, but at some point you got to look at the quarterback, and he's just not playing very well. And obviously this offense is only going as far as Eli takes them. So I don't know what it is. Obviously the offensive line is a huge issue, but Eli needs to figure it out, because he's missing some throws that you just have to make.
He really is. And James, when you look at Eli and you look at the numbers, I mean, 18 of 35 for less than 200 yards. I mean, we talked a lot about how this offense with Ben McAdoo changed his career and got him going again, and really took his trajectory in a different direction, because a few years ago you could have said, maybe he's going to slip, and then he played well under Ben. But the last 2 games, it has been ugly. I mean, do you put this on Eli? Do you put it on the circumstances around him? What do you think's going on with this passing game right now that just stinks at this moment?
I was kind of, people have been criticizing Eli the past 2 weeks, and he didn't play well at all by any means, but I kind of looked at his numbers his first 2 games, and I was like, he's not playing as bad as it looks. But last night was all Eli. I mean, he didn't have much protection, but he had great protection against the Vikings, and he was the same way. He was jittery, throwing balls into the dirt, high, low, off to the side, inaccurate. Just doesn't seem like he's comfortable back there. He's not playing very good football right now, and obviously there's only so much that you really can do about that. Because what are they going to do? They're going to put Ryan Nassib in the game. But Eli is just he's not right now. I mean, he's not playing well, and he has to be a lot better if this team is going to contend.
Yeah, he absolutely does. And for the Giants, they need him to be better. They need the entire offense to be better. And part of that's the offensive line, and part of it is the left tackle, Ereck Flowers. And we have a lot to talk about on this subject. Dan, we'll start with you. We'll kind of work our way backwards here with what happened in the locker room after the game, which has become a big talking point. You wrote about it and then we'll work our way back to on the field, where Flowers just hasn't performed to the level of a top 10, pick left tackle. But after the game, Dan, you could tell us what happened, but just to set the scene, I mean, you were in the locker room, and Jordan Raanan, who used to work for us here at NJ Advanced Media, was part of this podcast for a long time and helped start this podcast. You guys were there talking to Flowers, and then something happened that usually doesn't happen in the locker room. So, Dan, what did you see between Jordan and Flowers and kind of that whole scene in the locker room after the game?
Yeah, I mean, I'll paint the picture. I mean, if you read my story, I really just transcribed the entire 10-second exchange. I didn't want to leave anything to interpretation. What I wrote is how it went down. But me and another reporter, I assume was from Green Bay because I didn't recognize him. We're talking to Flowers, maybe 2 questions of just, generic post-game stuff. What's the matter with the offensive line, blah, blah, blah. Jordan had come over and stood on the side of Flowers. So I was actually in the middle of asking a question, and Flowers, turned to Jordan. And again, I don't remember word for word. The transcript is up on our site, but basically his message to Jordan was like, "Get away! I don't want you here." And Jordan just, he wasn't in a defiant way. He was just saying, "Listen, I'm just trying to do my job." And to that, Flowers got more animated, and he never blew up. It wasn't one of these things that caused the whole scene, as you can tell by the fact that I'm the only one who reported it, because the way the locker room was set up, people were all scattered about. They had rows of lockers separating the locker room into about 3 different sections, and literally every other reporter was in one of the other 2 sections when this happened, just kind of by chance. So it escalated to the point where Flowers got in his face to the point where he said, "Get the F out of my face, bro," or something to that effect. And again, Jordan said one more time, "I'm just doing my job," and Flowers just gave a quick hard shove for a 6'6", 330-pound guy basically to Jordan's chest, and sent him back, a couple of steps. Wasn't a huge deal in the sense, Jordan wasn't injured, and Flowers didn't escalate it any further. But it was, I've been doing this, I guess, for probably 10 years or so. I've never seen anything close to that in the locker room. I mean, you kind of hear some sort of legendary stories of reporters and players mixing up in the locker room, but I've never seen it. And you don't really hear about it too much nowadays, I feel like. Maybe a screaming match is the most you might get. So to see a player, and again, a pretty big player, put his hands on a reporter, kind of unprecedented in my mind. Obviously, it's going to be a topic the Giants didn't want to comment on it last night. They're going to have to address it. I mean, whatever you think about reporters, you can't have your players putting their hands on them. Especially, again, Jordan didn't do anything in the sense that he, provoked it. He was literally just standing there. He hadn't even said anything yet. And all he said was, "I'm just trying to do my job." And again, not in a way that was confrontational. So, it's just a really bad look for Flowers. Bad look for the Giants because, Ben McAdoo's only been at the helm for, 5 games? And there's a lot of kind of cracks in the foundation when you just talk about discipline. Again, not that Ben McAdoo could have prevented this, but everything's going to reflect on him, especially when things are going bad. So, it made a bad night a lot worse for Ereck Flowers.
No doubt about that. And it comes across bad, James. This feels like, this. I think in the outside perception, and you guys are around the team every day, but this is a team with, Dan just said cracks. You could talk about melting down, the personality. Even if this was a very isolated incident, and who knows why Flowers acted that way, or he was just upset or whatever towards Jordan, and this story, became a big story here. But this comes off as a team that is just, they're not all there right now, right, James?
Yeah, I think if you're someone on the outside looking in, I think that's pretty much the only thing you can assume. Look, what Ereck Flowers did was completely and totally unprofessional, unacceptable, and in my opinion, the Giants have to address it and they have to punish him. I don't know how they punish him. I don't know if they bench him. I don't know if they suspend him. I don't know if they fine him, but the Giants just can't look the other way. Oh, yeah, it's unfortunate. We're fact-finding mission here now. They have to do something about this because there's a lot of noise out there about Ereck Flowers. Now, who knows what's real and what's not real, but Flowers is a guy who's in his second year in the league. He's a top 10 draft pick. He is not making, in my opinion, the necessary progress that you would hope that your franchise left tackle is going to make. I think he has made some improvement from last year, but I don't know if he's made enough. And you just can't do it. And I think, Dan said, whatever you think about reporters and the media and us being in the locker room, everyone's entitled to their own opinion. But the bottom line is the NFL has a media policy that's been in place for decades that says The locker room is open after a 10 to 12-minute cooling off period. Usually the players get even more time to cool off because most guys don't speak to the media until after they've gotten showered and get dressed. They have to contractually obligated to speak once a week prior to the game, then after the game. And open locker room is open locker room. Everyone can be there, that wants to be there. And what I would say is, two things. The people are saying, well, Jordan should have walked away. And obviously, all of us have a personal relationship with Jordan. I mean, I worked with a guy for a year on that beat. But if it was any reporter, if it was just some guy from Green Bay I've never heard of, I'd say the same thing. One, it sounds to me, and Dan was there. I wasn't there, so I can't really speak to the whole thing. But sometimes you'll see a situation where a player will object to a reporter being around or whatever, but it'll be civil enough that the player can then basically say, all right, whatever, I'm not going to answer your question, but you can stay. Or the reporter will say, well, fine, I'll leave. I mean, it sounds like Flowers never really let that situation work itself out because he went from 0 to 60 and got in Jordan's face immediately. So he escalated the situation, in my opinion. Dan, would you say it's a fair characterization?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I mean, there was no one from the Giants PR staff around. Obviously, that would have helped, and I'm not really blaming them because, again, the way the locker room was set up, I mean, there was bigger scrums going on. There's only so many people. But typically, that's how you want to see it handled. I remember something last year. I don't remember who it was. I think it was the Rangers, and there was I think it was probably Brooksy from the Post. That's the only guy you ever hear about on that beat. And one of the players –
Baggy Day.
Yeah, one of the players didn't want him around. Yeah, it was the end of the season, so it's probably the time where you can kind of do that. But I remember watching that, and it was pretty intense, but it just doesn't cross that line to being physical. And again, I think if Flowers, I mean, it might sound a little juvenile, but you got to just probably go get the PR staff and be like, listen, I'm not talking while this guy's here. And then you can hash it out like adults. It's obviously never, again, keeping it in the elementary school mindset, never makes things better by taking it to a physical point. So, yeah, I mean, obviously he didn't handle it well. It was a very unique situation because not very often that in a post-game locker room something like this could happen in such a small, contained space without, kind of generating more attention. But yeah, I mean, Flowers just there's no other way to put it. He's got to handle the situation better. I mean, you're a professional. Whatever Jordan has written or whatever issue you have with the guy, you can handle it in a way without putting your hands on him.
The role of a reporter is to convey information to the fans. And if you're a Giants fan, I think you want to hear what Ereck Flowers has to say after he played so poorly last night. And, what are we supposed to do? Well, he doesn't want to say anything. So, I mean, if he doesn't want to speak, and if he wants to say I'm not talking and get on the bus and get fined by the NFL, that's his business. If he wants to say no comment, that's his business. But I don't think fans can say, he should have walked away. I mean, so what? You don't want to know what Flowers has to say? I mean, this is part of the job. You're a top 10 draft pick. You're the starting left tackle for the New York Giants. Deal with it.
Yeah, and I will add, I'll emphasize the fact that you've seen a lot of reporters who kind of goad guys into stuff. Jordan didn't. I mean, again, I'm not saying that because he's my friend. He literally came up just to stick a recorder in him. I don't know if he's going to ask a question because, I mean, there wasn't a ton to ask Flowers, and I'm sure Jordan was going to get a quote or two and keep it moving. And again, even when Flowers are confrontational, Jordan just said, I'm trying to do my job. And I know you might read that in print and might think he's doing it in kind of a taunting way. He really wasn't. He was like, listen, man, I'm just trying to do my job. That was the tone. More whoa, I don't understand why you're getting so fired up. I'm just trying to do my job. So again, because I think, you see it in print. There was no video, but I think we've all seen reporters who kind of maybe ask for it. And again, I don't know the history, but nothing Jordan did last night warranted that.
The one thing that is clear, and obviously Flowers did not handle himself well after the game, is he's not playing well on the field. And that compounds all this. Giants fans did want to hear. It's why you were there, Dan. It's why Jordan ran over. It's why wherever that Green Bay guy was there, people want to hear about what Ereck Flowers has to say, at least on a cursory level, on this Monday morning into this week, because he's their left tackle. He's not playing well. The offense stinks right now. How much of a concern is the offensive line, and Flowers in particular, James? Forget all the stuff, and we just talked about it, that happened with Jordan in the locker room. That's a whole other issue the Giants have to deal with, and he has to be a professional. But his on-field play, the profession he is, getting paid pretty well to do for the Giants, he's not doing it very well right now.
No, as I said earlier, I felt like the first couple of games this year, he had made progress, but last night was a major step back. And it wasn't just Flowers. I thought Bobby Hart played pretty poorly at right tackle, too, after having two solid games after Marshall Newhouse went down. But you look at Flowers, and I think the bigger issue with Flowers is not so much obviously the fact the offensive line is struggling, that's a problem. But Flowers is going to, until he really steps up and starts producing, he's going to have the whole, is he a fit at left tackle discussion. And I think those calls are just going to get louder after Sunday night's loss.
They certainly, and they should, right? I mean, if he doesn't play well and he doesn't block well, maybe he's not what they thought he'd be when they drafted him. Now, as we look at this team now, and I know one of you guys had the story on NJ.com with Justin Pugh. I think it was you, James, and his quotes about how the Giants are a good team and they're a feared team. They just have to get it together. After 5 games, what are the Giants in your opinion? I mean, is this a good team that is in a rough stretch? Is this a bad team that squeaked out 2 early wins and now we're seeing what they really are? Dan, when you look at the Giants right now, 2-3 through 5 games, what are they to you?
Well, yeah, it's interesting because if I go back to my season preview, game by game picks, I mean, I'm not trying to pat myself on the back for this, but I nailed this. This is how I projected it going. So when you get stuck in the middle of the storm, 3 games in a row looks terrible. But it was going to be a tough stretch. I mean, obviously they gave the Washington game away, but that's going to happen. They pulled the Dallas game out, they pulled the New Orleans game out. I mean, there's going to be a lot of those types of games during a season. I mean, they really haven't gotten blown out, so I mean, I guess you can look at it that way. Obviously, the Vikings game was not super close, but they were within a score in the fourth quarter. So it's easy to get caught up when you're in the eye of the storm. The problem is just some of the issues that have kind of been there since the preseason. If you want to talk about the offensive line, which was okay the first 3 weeks, 4 weeks, it all kind of came crumbling down last night. But I just think there's more issues than I would have expected. I mean, anytime you lose, there's going to be issues, there's going to be concerns. But I think the way they've gone to 2-3 is a little uglier than I expected because the offense, now 5 games in, still hasn't played well. I mean, hats off to the defense because these games could be a lot uglier because they're out there all the time, a lot of 3-and-outs. They actually gave the offense some takeaways finally, a lot of good field position. I mean, you're not going to shut out Aaron Rodgers in that offense. So 23 points in the situation they were in, I give them a lot of credit. But yeah, I think that it's easy to, hit the panic button, sound the alarms, and maybe that's not the worst thing to do at this point because, again, there are some issues here. But like I said, I thought they'd be 2-3, and I'm predicting them to go 10-6. I mean, looking back on that might have been a little overly optimistic to think they're going to turn it around that much. But I mean, hey, it's a tough stretch. They happen. This is a Ravens team that'll be coming in next week that's vulnerable. Just fired their offensive coordinator, so they clearly have problems. So I don't know if it's ready to jump ship, but there's certainly a few leaks that they better plug quick.
No, they certainly should, and they have to, right? And the Ravens do look vulnerable. They just, like you said, changed the offensive coordinator. So a fascinating game coming up. But James, when you look at the Giants right now, through 5 weeks, how should we look at them? Same type of deal in terms of first 2 wins. We gave them credit here. We said, wow, it's a different team than last year. They squeaked it out. But now 3 straight losses. I mean, what are the 2016 Giants? All I know is right now, as we sit here and have this conversation, they're in last place in the NFC East.
I think they're kind of what I thought they were going to be for most of the preseason. They're an 8-8, 9-7, 7-9, 500-ish football team that should be in the hunt. However you define that. If they take care of business, but I just, as I said, I think going into the season, I was saying this since April. It's not a really terribly easy schedule for the Giants. I don't know why fans had decided this was going to be some cakewalk schedule and they were going to go roll to 11 or 12 wins. It's a tough schedule, and it's even tougher now because I think the Ravens are, as Dan said, they have some issues, but they are 3-2. Rams have been plucky. Eagles have been great. Bengals, my big thing about this Giants team now is they're 2-3. They got to play the Ravens this weekend. They got to go to London and play the Rams. Then they come back from the bye for the Eagles and the Bengals. Can they get to that Bears-Browns stretch with a chance to, hey, we're going to go try to pick up 2 big wins and really make a push for the playoffs? I don't know at this point because I don't see this offense. I don't think there's a magic bullet for this offense. I just think they have major issues. They have depth concerns on defense. The defense is kind of an enigma to me. They can't rush the passer. Yeah, they're horrible on third downs, but yet they keep on holding teams to field goals. And if they start getting takeaways, I think they're going to be even better units. So I just think this is kind of a Giants team. They're like most of the NFL, the soft middle. They could be good one week, bad the next week. They're going to win some games. They're going to lose some games. It's just all going to come down to a couple plays here and there.
Is that the silver lining right now? Dan, you just mentioned this a few minutes ago, the defense, which the fact that they're not getting to the quarterback, I think, is standing out to people, and the lack of sacks because of how much money they spent. But as James was just saying there, they have played pretty sound defense for the most part this year. Is that, if Giants fans are trying to take away something to feel positive about, is that it? Because maybe you think eventually the offense does something and eventually this team could put it together if the defense continues to play well?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're looking for positives, the defense has been one. At the same time, the pass rush, that's a concern. I mean, again, you're paying these defensive ends some pretty big dollars, and I know sacks aren't everything, and yada yada. But at the end of the day, you got to get to the quarterback, and they're not doing that. I mean, I know Rodgers is tough. I mean, watching him work the pocket like that, he's as good as it comes. I mean, he just is so smooth back there. But, you bring in 4 guys. He just had all day. I mean, I know obviously that was a strategic thing because I think if you bring pressure, it's probably going to be worse for you. But you got to win some one-on-one matchups at some point. If you're Olivier Vernon, you're JPP, this is what you're here for. I mean, no one said it's going to be easy. You got to find a way to get to the quarterback. And they're not getting anything from the defensive tackles. They're trying to, bring in some of those backup defensive ends, move them inside. Anyone heard from Owa this season? He hasn't done anything. They actually try to give OV and JPP a couple of snaps off, which was much needed. And I think it was that series where the Packers kind of gashed him on the ground a few times, and you realize, well, maybe that's why you don't take those defensive ends out. So that's all the negative, the pass rush. But yeah, overall, again, I mean, the defense is battling. I mean, they're very shorthanded in the secondary. I mean, you got to tip your hat to DRC. I mean, that guy was, on one wheel last night. They must have announced him out 3 different times. I joked that he was like a villain in a horror movie where you just can't kill him, because every time they'd say he's out, you see him hobbling back on the field for the next possession. And, some of that he's probably better than the next option, which says a little bit about the depth. But credit to him for battling. And I mean, the defense, again, has been a bright spot. Also, a lot of times, though, when you need the defense to make that stop and they can't come through with it. Perfect example, the fumble late in the game where the ball, hits Kelvin Shepherd in the lap and he can't, come up with the loose ball when it hits the ground. Obviously, that would have been an enormous play. So the defense gets a B. It's not like it's been an A-plus effort, but definitely a lot better than the offense.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's been some positives there that you could take away and say this might keep going, and this might not just be an early season thing, and the defense might be there. So now as we look forward with this team, guys, I mean, they're 2-3. They've lost 3 in a row. There's been the ebbs and flows of this thing. James, when you look forward to this coming week, Baltimore, I mean, what do you think the theme of this week is going to feel like around the Giants? I mean, last week it was Beckham, and I thought on Sunday night, although he wasn't special, it was kind of a more of a normal, just a football game, and I know he went over and made up with the kicking net, but the Beckham thing was the theme of last week. We're going to have a lot of Flowers conversation this week because of what happened, but big picture, what do you think the conversation is going to be this week around the Giants? Like, how do they fix this? What do you think we're going to be talking about between now and the Baltimore game?
I think there's going to be a lot of heat on McAdoo, with the Flowers thing. Is this guy in control of the team? Is there discipline? There were penalties last night too. I mean, Roger Lewis had a really dumb interference call, penalty on a punt. They had 12 men in the huddle that got waved off by offsetting penalties. So that's an issue. Obviously, the Flowers thing, the Beckham thing. Obviously, it wasn't an issue last night, but that's still going to be fresh in people's memory. I think also, this offense, like, where's it going? What the heck's wrong with this offense? The last 2 years they've been a top 10 unit, and now they're averaging 17.8 points a game, and they can't get Victor Cruz the ball, and they can barely get Odell the ball. And, I just think there's going to be Flowers will be a big topic of discussion. I think where the Giants are going as a team, I mean, this is a must win. They've got to win Sunday. If they don't win Sunday, I think they're pretty much, they're not dead, but they're getting awfully close to it, because the Eagles are playing well, the Cowboys are playing well, the Redskins. I mean, if you think about it, the Giants are in last place, and they're basically 2 games back of third place because they've already lost to the Redskins. They could dig themselves a hole they can't climb out of real quick. So I think major subjects will be Flowers, both on the field and off the field, McAdoo, both on the field and off the field. And, they got to win this game on Sunday or they're in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, they would be. A 2-4 would be a major hole to climb out of. And Dan, for you, James just mentioned McAdoo and the conversation that will probably happen this week. How much of this is on him? I mean, he's a first-year coach. It's weird because it was so easy, I think, for Giants fans and and really people all over the place have just put a lot of what happened last year and the last few years on Tom Coughlin. He's getting old. He's lost the team, his voice, all that kind of stuff. And now that's clearly out the window, and it's a coach we're still trying to get to know, but the team's not performing. Where do you think McAdoo falls in this?
Well, first off, I went and looked it up. I did have them beating the Ravens, so I mean, if things just continue to follow script, don't worry, guys, it'll be okay. 3-3. Listen. The thing about McAdoo is he doesn't have some extensive resume. He moved up the ranks really quickly. It's kind of easy to forget, maybe because he doesn't look that young, but he's only, 38, 39 years old. So he hasn't had this long track record of huge success. I mean, obviously the launch pad to this position was, being an offensive coordinator here for 2 years on teams that put up a lot of points and went a combined, 12-20. So, I mean, you don't know that this guy can do it. I'm not saying he can't either. It's not fair to judge him 5 games into his career that he can or cannot do it. We don't know that yet, but it's fair to be concerned because, again, there isn't a track record, and it's not easy to go. It's one thing to be offensive coordinator where you're pretty much worried what X's and O's. You're spending all your time in the meeting room with Eli Manning and obviously the other position groups, then to have to step to the front of the room. And obviously he got great reviews for that. So, players all offseason, all the training camp said that, he has great command of the room. Justin Pugh said as recently as last week that, he loves McAdoo. So he's not losing the team, it doesn't seem like, or anything like that. But losing has a tendency to maybe speed up that process. So they got to get things right because, James mentioned, Victor Cruz, 0 catches. I think he had maybe 2 targets. That's not probably going to sit so well with him. It's really hard to understand, though, when a guy's specialty is offense, he's still calling the plays, and the offense looks this bad. So, there's only one way to, only one place to point the finger. They can't fire the offensive coordinator. That wouldn't really do a heck of a lot when the head coach is calling the plays. So, I think concerns about McAdoo are warranted. There's obviously deeper concerns because this is the roster he inherited, and there's obviously some flaws there. But with the off-field stuff and just some of the decisions he's made, he's going to have to really prove himself because I think it's fair to be skeptical at this point.
I think you have to be, right? I think until he proves himself or until they get out of this hole and start winning some games and go on a winning streak, there's going to be a lot of skepticism. All right, let's wrap with this, guys. As we look forward to the Giants against the Ravens, the Rams coming up against that, a kind of a crossroads here for McAdoo and the Giants. Give me one reason for both of you. One reason Giants fans should look forward and say it's going to be okay, and then one reason or one thing that maybe is standing out to you that says it might not be okay. And obviously, this is all in the grand scheme of football, but for this season, it might not be okay. So one reason for optimism, one reason for maybe realism or pessimism. We'll start with you, James.
I think for optimism, the Ravens and the Rams are not the Vikings and the Packers, so I think the Giants have a realistic shot to go win these next 2 games. Both teams don't really have great offenses, so that should help the Giants. If their defense can play well, if the offense can do enough, they could be 4-3 coming out of the bye. The Eagles, who knows? Yesterday's loss to the Lions could have been the beginning of the Wentz wagon kind of coming back down to earth. The Bengals have been kind of up and down too, so all of a sudden that game, in mid-November on Monday Night Football at home doesn't look so tough. So I think that's the positive, that they do have a schedule from that things could break their way. If they play better, they could win a couple of games, maybe get themselves back into a stronger position in the hunt. But the reason for pessimism is, it's just you look at this offense and I don't see, all the playmakers are healthy. The only guy they're missing Rashad Jennings, they're missing Shane Vereen, but I don't think Bobby Rainey and Orleans Darkwa and Paul Perkins have been a significant drop-off from those guys. So all the receivers are healthy. Obviously they don't have Larry Donnell, but, Larry Donnell will tie 6-1, half dozen the other, I think. I think both those guys are solid. They do what they do. The offensive line, it's unless Will Beatty suddenly gets put in at one of the tackle spots and is sensational, you think they would have done that by now if they thought he was ready to do that. So I think the offense is the reason for pessimism is you look at it and there's not a lot of clear answers. Oh, well, it's definitely going to get better when this happens. This might be the group.
It might be, and that is not a good thing for Giants fans. Dan, for you, a reason for some optimism and a reason for maybe realism or pessimism as we look forward for the rest of the season. And maybe it could just be because they're following your picks exactly.
Yeah, and trust me, I looked it up. I got to turn it around. They're going to be 5-3. Everyone just calm down. But no, I think I'll actually say the same thing as my reason for optimism and pessimism is the offense. As far as optimism, it can't be this bad, right? I mean, again, we look at the weapons they have. We look at what this system with Eli Manning at the helm and Ben McAdoo calling the plays has done the past 2 seasons with inferior weapons. You just have to feel like at some point the breakout now that's going to become a thing we're going to probably be talking about. Like, well, when's it coming? Because it certainly didn't on Sunday night. But I think that is, you just have to look at it and say, it seems impossible that a team with this much talent can't solve a cover 2. Because, I mean, that's really what it keeps back to the game. And they make it sound like this grand strategic thing they're going against every week. They have safeties deep. You know what I mean? Like, there's got to be a way to figure that out. I don't know. I'm not an X and O's expert, but I think there's some ways to attack this that shouldn't be so overwhelming to them. But so I guess I kind of went optimistic into pessimistic there in that answer. But so, and then the pessimism is, can they turn it around? I mean, we're a third of the way into the season. It's easy to say, oh, it's still early. It's so early. Well, at some point you are what you are. So again, the pieces are in place, but there's a reason why we haven't seen it yet, and maybe it doesn't just click. I don't know. Again, they haven't played great defenses, which is the thing that kind of concerns me. Outside the Vikings, you're facing mediocre to bad defenses week in, week out, and not able to move the ball. So, actually, I shouldn't say not able to move the ball, not able to get the ball in the end zone. So yeah, for me, it's all going to be on the offense. So if you want to look at it half full, that hey, this offense still hasn't clicked, and we're hanging around, we're 2-3. Pessimistic is we're 2-3 because the offense hasn't clicked, and maybe it's not going to click.
Yeah, it feels like it's getting late early, and the Giants have to fix that before things change, and the season isn't what a lot of people thought it could be. So the Giants are 2-3. The Ravens coming in with a new offensive coordinator. Meanwhile, you have the rest of the NFC East in a lot of ways looking a lot better than it did a few weeks ago. So we'll have a lot to talk about next week after the Raven game. James, Dan, of course, always thanks for doing this. Safe flight home, James.
You got it, Joe. Thank you.
You too, Dan. We'll catch up next week.
Sounds good. Thanks, Joe.
And thanks to all of you for listening to episode 69 of Talk is Cheap, our New York Giants podcast right here on NJ.com. You can listen on SoundCloud, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Google Play, any way you want to listen, you can. Of course, iTunes, leave us a rating there. It helps the show grow so we can bring more to you in the future. Thanks for listening.